Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Frank and Stan chat. But this is from the Spotlight group of chats that we have, and this is Spotlight is about where we take one particular sort of subject and we have a single guest and we chat to that guest about the issue. And I'm delighted to say we have Tom Zebedee with us today. Hello, Tom.
Hi, Frank. Hi, Stan.
Hi,
Hello.
Tom.
And for those of you, so that we've got a little record here, why is Stan wearing his England top? It's because England are in the Euro semi-final against the Netherlands tonight. So just in terms of context, if you're looking at this
Last
two
chance
years
to
down
wear,
the line,
yeah, last
you'll
chance
know.
to wear the shirt.
Not at all.
Well, before you outgrow it or whatever. um, okay, so Tom, who are you and how do we know each other and what are you doing?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me along, Frank. Yeah, I'm Tom Zebedee, and until recently, I was the Chief Technology Officer at Ofsted. So I looked after all things cybersecurity and lots of other bits of technology in the organization. And I was also a member of the kind of wider government security profession. Um, since finishing at Ofsted, I've set up a little company called Cyberculture, which we'll talk about in a minute. Um, but I'm also heavily involved in some of the cyber education initiatives, both in the UK and I'm from the UK and US perspective. So I've got a real interest in developing cyber talent and bringing them through the pathway and getting them into kind of cyber jobs, whether that be through apprenticeships or whatever route. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is how do we enhance our cyber preparedness by making sure that the culture in our organizations is really strong. And cyber culture is really about helping leaders to develop themselves and also their teams so that they provide a really excellent cyber defense in the organization that they're in. And it's about soft stuff. It's not really about technical
So this isn't about coding.
countermeasures. No, not at all. It's about I think this is really about. Uh, I think people think about cyber in two ways. There's sort of like existential risk or existential event that might happen to my organization, and what a terrible thing that would be, and kind of people are quite passive about it. Or I suspect how leaders could come at this is to view it like they do any other risk of flooding, risk of losing the electricity, strike, COVID, whatever it might be. It's something that might happen, and you can define the kind of countermeasures and the kind of risk management techniques that you can put in place to reduce both the impact of something happening and the likelihood of something happening. Because it's a risk, you can't take it away, but you can certainly put yourself in a much better place when you, in the unlikely event that you have to respond to it.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, I want to be in a place where I can speak to leaders and kind of give them, I want to give them an opportunity to kind of practice some of the things that they might be considering or they might come across from both an attacker's perspective and from a defender's perspective. Because I think when you get your head around what people are trying to do and the sort of things that they're trying to compromise your systems for and how you might defend against that, you might find it's a rather different story than you expect it to be.
Right.
Um,
Hey, this is all timely, isn't it? This is a bit like England's defense and the Netherlands attack. I mean,
yeah,
in a sense, they sit there and think, oh, they're going to do this, but actually, it can be slightly different in reality. You know what I mean?
it can. I mean, there's a couple of very good articles around at the minute which are worthless. There's a File on Four documentary about the Harris attack,
Oh,
which
yes.
is really really
Because that was very,
interesting.
I mean, can you just explain what that was? Because it was quite substantial and
Yeah,
quite
so really,
debilitating.
yes. So I don't want to take away the words from Harris, but it was a case of turning up at the school one, I don't know, Wednesday morning and finding that people couldn't get into the school. They couldn't, when they did get into the school, they then couldn't get into their systems. And it's really about how a very targeted attack can, can go across all of your systems because everything's interrelated now, and nobody could pay for their meals. You couldn't get into the Sims system, couldn't get into the school itself, etc., etc. Um, and as I understand it, that was a ransomware attack,
Right.
and so Harris were asked for some money to release all of that stuff, and they went through the process of trying to find someone to help them to work their way through that. I think the interesting thing about Harris is, and you find this a lot about cyber incidents, you don't really know what's happened. People don't really want to tell.
Sure.
And and as I'm about to go on and say, I think sometimes people don't really know what's happened anyway. But they brought someone in to kind of act as their head of security. And the question that he asked when he first arrived was, who has our back here? So who am I going to fall back on if something terrible happens in this organization or this setting? And they didn't have anybody to help them. Now, when I was a senior member of the government security profession, I knew they could always go to NCSC, and there would be somebody who's used to managing incidents who would probably take over the response and deal with my problem. That's not the same in school space, and it's certainly not the same in the private sector space.
Yes.
So that's really worth listening to if you're a school leader.
So really,
Uh,
just, I mean, who would, if Stan and I were, heaven forbid, I mean, we were in charge of 70 schools, and we were this, the joint CEOs, who would we turn to then?
I,
To
yeah,
people like you, or would it be other agencies like
I,
government agencies and things?
well, I think it kind of depends, really. If you've got an IT supplier, I think a lot of this would fall on the IT supplier to manage the incident and start
Right.
to try and restore services and all that kind of stuff. Um, I'm certainly aware of instances in the education sector where NCSC and others have got involved in
Right.
trying to help restore services because some I think Redcar is quite a famous attack where it was slightly more than the college got attacked. It got taken out by other infrastructure in the local authority and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So you eventually get to the point where certainly I think if you're in the public sector, eventually you'll get a bit of help, but it's likely to take a while to arrive. And in the meantime, what do you do?
Mm.
It's a bad thing to practice your response plan when
It
it's
could really,
happened.
yeah.
Yeah, it's better it's better to do it when everything's working,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you can
I have to say,
you
Tom,
go on,
I
Stan.
used to run a series of training on critical incidents, but a cyber attack was never one of the ones that we considered because it just
Yeah,
didn't appear to be that big a risk. This is a few years ago, so I
yeah.
assume now that times have changed somewhat.
Well, I think if you look at the news and stuff like that, I mean, it's obvious that
Mm.
there's a lot more of it around now. Whether we're reporting more of it, I don't know. I looked at some NCSC. They've just produced a summary report on a survey they did, and I mean the numbers are really high. And I'm not sure what period this is over, but 52% of primary schools had been subject to some sort of cyber incident. 72% of secondary schools, 86% of colleges, essentially, and then, not surprising, this nearly 100% of universities and higher education
Yeah.
settings. But they're obviously, there's a lot of interest in research programs and all that kind of stuff. But I think those figures, whether they're kind of in the ballpark or not, would suggest you've got a fairly good chance of something happening in your school, whether it be low level or, what we're talking about there in Harris is a really sophisticated, targeted attack intended to extract some money from an organization.
Yeah. It's funny, the
Yeah. So
GDPR regulations that were introduced around, was it about 2018 or something? I
yeah,
have to say that when I was the CEO, we had a colleague who was leading on that, and she did a really good job. But her key job was actually just raising awareness of where data is and how secure is it, and I think that who has access to it, all these sort of questions, I think we just assumed. I'm not suggesting you could have run a horse and coaches through everything, but there were clear gaps in our sort of systems that we were just pretty slack.
yeah,
Because I don't think we were thinking, oh, but it's not going to happen to us, is it? I think that's where we were
yeah.
at in our
I
thinking.
mean, I tend to see it as it's a bit like a set of keys. And I think that lots of organizations, including schools, hold lots of personal data about
Mm,
people. And, if you put all of that together, you could probably pretty quickly work out where someone lives, what their date of birth is, what their bank account is. And if you're storing all of those things in
yeah.
one place and not separating them across a range of systems, it's pretty easy to steal that data. And it's even easier to steal it if you manage to persuade somebody in the school to share the data with you
Yes.
because they think you're someone else.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, but also
and you've
a
got
rogue,
responsibilities,
but also a rogue, somebody who's been, I mean, because I've heard of this, somebody who's
insider
been
attacks.
paid, to get into the system, an employee, and then actually just sort of just dumps the sort of findings or whatever they've got to somebody
Yeah.
else, and it's very difficult to work out how that's happened. And I am aware of a case where the police are involved in that because that was being used that information was being used to sell to somebody else, and that was then supporting an addiction this person had, so it was
Yeah.
forever ever ending, and it was, while that addiction was in place, you were never going to stop that person trying to do it,
And that's one of the things that people will, if somebody was trying to extract data from your organization, uh, that's a really cheap and easy way of doing it. So find somebody who's, maybe needs a little bit of money,
mm,
um, and recruit them to help you to do it. You then don't have to deploy a whole pile of technical, um, you know, things to attack an organization because you've got somebody in there who's just handing you information. So, and I think our kind of almost our default stance is to think outwardly about
yes,
things here and go, well, I'm worried about some, sort of foreign crime gang who's trying to kind of, break in through the front door of the school. But, that requires them to expend quite a significant effort. And if they could do it in a much simpler way, they will try and do it in a much simpler way than expending all that energy trying to get into your organization.
yeah, 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 I mean,
The other report I was gonna mention that if anybody's watching this and they want a good read and they want it to keep them awake at night is the report on and if this one did keep me awake at night is the report on the British Library attack, which happened I think last November. And ordinarily you don't find out what's happened, but the executive summary in there, which is about 3 pages long, is a brilliant read and would worry anybody who's running quite a large system, anybody who's running something like an organization whose systems have grown over time and maybe
right,
had things
right,
bolted onto them and maybe use a variety of different, I don't know, operating systems and infrastructure because that's the way that, I don't know, maybe a multi-academy trust builds itself in that way. It acquires some schools and it acquires a school's information system from that supplier and they add it to something over here. And that report in terms of how they were reconnoitered by, and that was a foreign criminal gang, how they reconnoitered the system, found out where the weak points were, extracted all of the data, then locked down all of their systems, cleaned down all of the kind of fingerprints on their systems so you couldn't find out what they'd done. And then because of the way that they bolted systems together over the years, they thought, well, we'll have to put everything onto brand new infrastructure. And that's great, except something, an application that's 30 years old doesn't work on new infrastructure.
yes,
So you
yeah.
just can't restore that element of your system. So I suppose that's back to don't do your response plan when
Well,
you first
yeah,
when you've
yeah,
just been hit. But it's a really interesting read, and I think when you read that, and it isn't a hard read, and it's not technical. When you read that, and where I've worked, we've definitely added things on over the years and done our best to keep them up to kind of away from legacy risks and all that kind of stuff. But it is really hard to do that, and
yeah, yeah.
you know,
It's funny
so
with
there's a couple of good things around which I
right.
think leaders are well worth reading and just
Well,
thinking, how does this look for me?
before we get into the culture bit of it, just one thing, you picked up on a point there about multi-academy trusts that are growing, and I think I was completely naive when it came around to this growth strategy because to me, it was around sort of, I put it down to buildings, budget, and leadership. Those were the sort of three things that I was always sort of mindful of. But the issue is that when you're taking schools on from various local authorities and they've been maintained schools,
Mm.
my assumption was that we're just sort of, that will sort of bring over all of their systems, into ours. But of course, in many respects, you can. But one of them that you can't, or you can't do it well, is actually the information system that they might have
Yeah.
developed with their local authority. And one of the board directors said to me, "Well, yeah, what's your attendance like in these new schools?" And I said, "Well, I've no idea because that information doesn't feed into our system." And
Yeah.
then I remember him saying, "Well, don't you think that's a bit of a risk?" And I thought, "Yeah, what you mean a risk that I don't know what the attendance figures are like for each school?" He said, "No, no, 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 no. I mean a bigger risk because you
Yeah.
don't know how secure that school system is in terms of, you've just assumed that it's come from X local authority and that local authority's got a secure system. You've not analysed that. You've not seen how easy it would be to come into your system and for somebody
Uh,
to just, run havoc through your system through that.
yeah. And I think for leaders, that's one of the things that we'll do is, give you that kind of high level toolkit of, how can I trust my supplier and what questions should I ask my supplier? And I don't think they have to be particularly technical questions. I think if your supplier's got a couple of kind of obvious badges, Cyber Essentials Plus, ISO 27001,
So what are those again?
that
Just what are those again?
so there's a few industry standards around,
Okay.
and there's loads of these, and I wouldn't get into prescribing them here, but two that spring to mind are Cyber Essentials Plus, which is an NCSC sponsored program, which kind of um, describes how you should look after your firewalls, how you should look after your security configuration, all that kind of stuff. If your supplier's got that accreditation, it should give you some confidence that
Mm,
they're going to be doing things in the right way. And similarly with ISO 27001, which is an international standard.
yeah.
Um, but, small suppliers might not have those things. And that, I guess, means you then need to start asking questions about the things that you would have derived some assurance
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
So, how do you patch all that kind of stuff? I think it becomes more complex then. And leaders might need a bit of help to do that, as well as all of the rest of the day jobs that they're doing.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
think there's definitely a curiosity there around how are you looking after us? How often do you update? How do you do your patching? All that kind of, they're reasonable questions to ask them. It's about having the confidence to ask those questions. I think if your supplier's a bit annoyed about you asking them, you were probably right to ask them.
So, I mean,
So
Stan's the culture man on this chat. I mean, you talked before about culture. Is that just having a sort of attitude where it's not a silly question? It's, you just need an openness towards all of this stuff,
yeah, I think there's four or five elements to it. Yeah, I think you do need to develop a really open culture, because if you don't know if somebody's clicked on an email,
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to manage that incident. You're not going to be able to learn from it. So this is the kind of Civil Aviation Authority kind of approach. You you have a very open reporting culture where people aren't in trouble for saying that they've done it, and as an organization we
Yeah.
learn and we can then adapt policies and adapt guidance and communications so that we can
It's quite
advise
hard
people
in
of what to do.
education, isn't
I have to
it? Go on,
say,
Stan.
Tom, I've worked in a large organisation that worked with the civil aviation people on developing that culture. And the boss at the end of saying, if you make a mistake, we learn from it, blah, 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 all through these positive things. And then I said, of course, if you make a second one, you'll be sacked.
Yeah, not necessary to say that, really, was it? So, and so the other bits of culture for me are, there's leadership behaviors as well. So, and some of the, there is that curiosity and understanding about your supply chain. And, you'd be interested in where you were buying your food from in a school, wouldn't you? You'd be interested, if it's, so and so catering
Yeah.
company, is it healthy? All that kind of stuff. This is no different. You just need to know what questions to ask. But then there's a bunch of leadership behaviors around, how you behave with equipment. Do you have a special laptop that other people don't have? And
Mm.
is that laptop on your network, or are you using it kind of, off the network so it's not being monitored? The corporate password policy isn't being used and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's definitely a leading by example piece here. And then there's, um, developing really good information management processes that are used across the organization. So, there are lots of information management incidents, which, people sending the wrong email to the wrong person with the wrong details in it, and then, chaos ensues. And my experience suggests to me that often happens with very busy people, just trying to get the job done, and not having time to take care. So I guess in schools, what's that? Bursars, secretaries, people like that. So trying to embed that, get somebody to check this before you send it. That's not a cyber thing. That's just a really good. That's just something you should do when you're handling information. Schools are likely to be data processors in GDPR terms as a minimum, and are probably data controllers for quite a lot of the information. So they've got responsibilities that the ICO would tell them about and all that kind of stuff. And then there's a bunch of stuff around how you manage access to your systems, passwords. Are people using the same passwords for their home life as they're using for school life? We recommend they didn't do that.
Yeah.
And are they using good password hygiene? Sort of three random words is something at NCS we talk about, which is,
Three random words.
Three random words. So I might look around my desk here and go pen, envelope, suntan lotion. Yeah, I've probably given away too much about my desk there, but anyway, packing for a holiday. But so you and something that would be very, very hard to forget, or sorry, very hard to break. So it's not, all the classic passwords, password.
Yeah. No, yeah.
Password with a star in it. Yeah. Your date of birth, your address, all those kind of things. They're all breakable and derivable. And then, so I think there's something around developing that culture where everybody just behaves in a way where it's just going to be much harder for somebody to break into systems or compromise them from a very simple perspective. You really want to push people to a place where they're having to take a bit of time to compromise what you're doing. It's a bit like locking a bicycle up. I think if your bicycle's locked up in a better way than the one next to it, yours will probably be there when you come back, because they're not going to try it. It's too much effort. So you want to be in a place where the culture is good enough to make people look at other ways of compromising your systems, and that's where you're into the supplier space.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off there. I mean, I'm just interested in how you shift that culture then. Because say you're, Stan's the new CEO of this, amazing Mountain Academy Trust, and he's walked in and he can see all this not happening, all the stuff that should be happening. I mean, how easy or what sort of actions would you take to actually sort of, because in a way this is not something you can just sort of, it's something you need to take your time over, but actually it's a critical risk now, isn't it?
I would have thought when Stan arrives is a really good time to start to think about doing that. And if you worked with somebody like us, we'd spend some time with the leadership team, kind of gaming some of this. Hopefully, I think the thing is, this stuff doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be catastrophized. It's relatively simple things that, if they're repeated on a daily basis, it's going to keep you really safe. So I think there's a lot about communications. There's loads about leadership behaviors here. I think if you do it, if you build it, they will come. So I think you've really got to show that you value it. And I've worked with loads of leaders who really do value behaving in this way and making sure that their passwords are complex, difficult to break, aren't shared with people. I used to like it when people said, "Well, I can't tell somebody my password, even though they're an IT technologist here." I need to know how they're going to handle that, and are they going to change that password afterwards, and all that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that you want to have in place.
Right.
So I think there's, um, I'm working with this in the board space and a more corporate space as well, where I think you're dealing with much bigger organizations. Probably the impact of a breach would be much more economically
Mm.
catastrophic for them, because they could lose a lot of money and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think it can be done overnight, Stan. I think Frank, it's something you have to keep working at, and and you know keep saying it till your teeth bleed, and all those kind of old change management at it. I don't know, call
Yeah.
out the David
Yeah.
Bell there. um but you've got to keep doing it, keep demonstrating it, and your policies have got to ask people to do it and make it clear to people what to do when there is an incident. And you've then got to be able to handle that in the right way. You've only got 72 hours to report to the
Yes.
ICO. So you've got to have somebody in your organization who's expert enough to be able to do that. But that's big. That's, for a primary school,
That's well,
it'll be the same person doing all that, won't it?
yeah. And we were I mean, I remember once the first time we had to report, and it felt like we had failed, and
Yeah.
but actually the demands on that individual and myself to turn that round in that period of time was quite significant.
Yeah.
It wasn't about damage limitation on our side with the regulator. It was really we needed to be clear what we were telling the regulator was correct, and actually being
Yeah.
precise about what we were saying. We thought was an important element of us telling the story, because we didn't want it to come back later that actually we had to retract some of the comments that we'd made because they were inaccurate, which would highlight even more the lack of security there was in our system. But
Yeah, I think the ICO has changed the way they handle that kind of stuff. Now they'd rather know
yeah,
and give you time to investigate what's happened, and
right,
then you kind of say, well, we do think something's happened, or we don't.
yeah,
But I think all of that stuff. I wanted to say something about kind of the benefits of doing the work up front compared to not doing the
mm,
work, is that prevention is magnitudes cheaper than restoring things after an incident's happened. I was at a conference last week, and somebody was talking about secure by design in software development. It wasn't a very exciting conference, but the exciting fact there was that the effort of developing something that's secure when it's designed, if you call that one, the effort to making it secure after you put it through the test process and discovered it's not at the end is like 1,000 times
mm,
more. So it's far better to do it up front. When someone joins your organization, it's
yeah,
the time to take them through the process and say, around here passwords look like this. um yeah Multi-factor authentication is another really good one, because
mm,
people, I think, find it quite burdensome. This is when you get like a
yeah,
passcode to your
yeah, to your
phone.
mobile.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody finds that a bit burdensome, and is it going to get in the way? And there's loads of ways of developing that, so that if it's on the same device and we know that's your device, we might only
Yeah,
send a code
yeah,
to you every 50 times or whatever
yeah,
it might
yeah.
be. But nobody complains about it from a personal banking perspective, do
No,
No,
no.
no, there is that with a personal banking one. There's that sigh when you realise you've got to go and find your mobile phone because you
Yeah.
and then there's the feeling afterwards. Well, actually, that's not a bad thing, is it? That
Yeah, yeah,
No, I know that's been secure.
yeah.
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 So I'm conscious we've done 30 minutes there, folks. Believe it or not, it's
Yeah. I
amazing how
thought
it
we would.
rattles along.
I just
I
listened
mean,
for 30
I know
minutes.
Tom, if anyone listening to this is interested a little bit more in doing more work around this, so how do they get in contact with you?
Well, you can see my sign behind my head there, possibly.
Yeah, there it is.
So yeah,
Cyberculture.
so there's a website. Yeah, sorry, there will be a website. There isn't one yet. There is a logo, but you can get me at Tom at Cyberculture, and Cyberculture has a dash in the middle of it. .org, and just reach out to me, and we can have a chat and see if we can help you with something to try and understand how to get you on the road to, I think, massively improving your your cyber preparedness without spending very much money at all, and certainly without doing too many technical things.
Brilliant.
Been great to chat to you.
Yeah, no, it's been fascinating.
And it's been eye-opening again.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
really keen to work with leaders across the sector,
yeah,
really. So,
yeah. And I suppose the message,
reach out.
Don't leave it until it is too late. Get on the front foot with this.
Where are you based, Tom?
I'm based in the Northwest. Yeah. So, I live in Clitheroe. So,
right.
and I work out of the Dish in Manchester, which is the digital security hub, a couple of days a week. So,
if we were doing a head teacher briefing it wouldn't be Clitheroe, but it'd be Accrington, somewhere like that. It wouldn't be far.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely. Very easy to get to. Yeah.
Would you be able to do 20 minutes on?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'll talk to you further about that.
There you are.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I can talk a little bit more about what a session might look like and how to get people involved. And I think it's the sort of thing that might be quite good for a training day, or maybe a day before you start a new academic year, if you're looking for a couple of hours or something different to do.
I'm interested. If I was running the organisation again, is what's the induction like for new staff? How are we getting that right? So. And that's something that will never go away. But something that I think it's not just a one-off event here. This is how do you keep that emphasis going?
I think the other end of it, Frank, is not just induction. It's how do we manage those people who are long in the tooth and don't believe in any of this? How do we get them playing the same way as everybody else? Because those are the hard ones to shift.
And those rogue, the ones that are within the organisation who are wishing to act in a roguish way, that's another sort of interesting session, I think.
Yeah, that's where that Harris file on 4 thing is worth getting people to listen, or offering people an opportunity to listen to it, because I think it will. You can't hide your head in the sand. If this happens to you, and somebody wants to steal 30,000 people's data, you're in for a really difficult couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And it's going to cost you a lot of money.
Right. Well, if that doesn't make you want to have contact with Tom Zebedee, I don't know what does. But anyway, thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Really fascinating discussion. So until our next spotlight, we'll see you all again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.